from the Marcellus all the way over to the Piceance and the DJ, up in the Bakken, in the Eagleford, in Haynesville, a variety of different locations. Here's a common chemical hazard in oil and gas extraction. And you know, it's one that we don't look at a whole lot. I'll tell you the reason why. Workers are very familiar with the whole issue of H2S hazard. They know that it knocks you down, and they know that it kills you. And here's a good example. This is a gentleman whose name was Rolando, and I liked him for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, he had a NIOSH hard hat sticker on his hard hat. Well, immediately I'm going to like this guy. And the second reason is, you know, anybody who writes no limit on your hard hat, I mean, I don't know what that meant, but I like the guy. And, you know, he just struck me as a guy who, you know, he worked safe. And I watched him for a long time, and I noticed he had an H2S dosimeter on the back of his hard hat. So I asked him when we were sitting down at lunch one day, I said, Rolando, I said, do you know what those numbers mean if that thing goes off? And Rolando just turned and looked at me and he said, no. Just real matter of factly. And I said, you don't? What do you mean you don't? He goes, oh. And I said, you don't? He goes, no. I only need to know one thing. I said, what is that? And he said, this. He'd written run on the face of it.
You want to shift it back to 1 p.m. Central?
You know? And he said, downwind. I said, which way is downwind today? He pointed exactly which way downwind was. I said, what other way do you run? He said, crosswind. I said, where's that? He goes, right over there to the muster area. I said, what's at the muster area? He said, 2 SCBAs. I said, self-contained breathing apparatus. Do you know how to use one? He goes, yeah. There's my risk assessment right there, at least for one person, you know. If I was an OSHA compliance inspector, boom, it's done. So H2S is something that workers are very familiar with. VOCs from flowback water and pit areas. If you run samples like we have, there's some area samples right there, you get a chromatogram that shows you a wide variety of different things. Methylbenzene, benzene, xylenes, toluene. The issue is most workers don't spend much time working around flowback pits. They really don't. At least not what we've observed. This is what it looks like here. You can see this is non-specific. It's isobutylene concentration. It's a PID, photoionization detector. And this just shows you the trend, that as the frac goes on, you get this nice curve here, and then as the frac stops, it starts to go off. These aren't particularly high concentrations. It wasn't a particularly big reserve pit, and it was on a very hot day, about 112 days. They're not remarkable to me at all. Diesel particulate is something that we're more concerned about. Why is that? Well, there's generally a lot of diesel engines. There's a lot of motive power on hydraulic fracking sites. Each engine has about 200 horsepower, generates quite a bit of energy. Depending on how big and giant it could have anywhere from 5 to sometimes up to 20. Why are we concerned about it? Well, you know, the workers ask us. And you can see here, this is what it looks like during the day. And if you go there before the sun comes up, you take advantage of the Tyndall effect, and you can actually see the plumes of DPM that's going up. Now, it's obviously a variety of different things. That's an aerosol. There's particulates and there's gases in there. We've done a little bit of sampling for this. Unlike VOCs, what you see is diesel particulate matter tends to be more peaky, tends to be more up and down. That's probably the use and cycling of the pump motor engines. I'd call this a very, very small data set, 13 personal breathing zone samples. Roughly about a quarter of those exceeded 20 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, OSHA or NIOSH doesn't have any occupational health criteria for BPM. The state of California is the only state that has this, and it's 20 micrograms per cubic meter as a time-weighted average for prevention of lung cancer. Now, a couple of these samples, 2 personal breathing zone and 2 area, were roughly twice that. We haven't done a lot of work in this area yet, but it may be a concern. Chemicals. You know, one of the things about chemicals that we've noticed is the operators that work around them are really creative. Now, this guy in particular, look at that wingsock that he's using. He gets the absolute, you know, best job for a wingsock. It's basically an inflated nitrile glove, 2 of them actually. But, you know, I also spent a lot of time talking to this guy, and he was very serious about controlling the chemicals. He said, look, you know, we know if 1 drop of this stuff hits the ground, we're in trouble. Most of it comes out there in carboys. It's transported directly into the manifold before it goes downhole. We don't see that as being a particularly big issue. One thing may be glutaraldehyde, the photo on the right there. We've done a very little bit of work on that. These are total aldehydes now that we looked at. The NIOSH occupational criteria is about 0.2. So ground level near a frac tank was a little less than that. top of the frac tank opening was for total aldehydes. This included aldehyde specifically. It was at the NIOSH REL. And then if you actually take something and put it inside the headspace of a frac tank, roughly twice that. Workers don't spend a whole lot of time around these tanks, at least on the sites that we've been on. This is a bigger issue, and nobody seems to be looking at this. But it was fairly obvious to us whenever we went out on site that silica, minerals, everybody's talking about chemicals. Well, let's talk about minerals here for a minute. Silica, it's highly regulated by OSHA. It's on national, local, and regional emphasis programs. Why is that? Well, several different reasons. It's probably one of the oldest known occupational hazards from a lung disease perspective, okay? And 200 workers die every year, still, today, from silicosis. And the thing about silicosis is, by preventing exposure, you prevent the disease. The problem is once someone has silicosis, if you cease the exposure, it doesn't necessarily stop the disease. In fact, it doesn't. There's a lot of sand being used. One of the prior speakers talked about this, and it's virtually 100% silica. This is how workers see it, unfortunately. They see it as sand. And that's how many of you may see it. Well, as an industrial hygienist, this is how we see it right here. And it's not these particles right here that we're particularly concerned about, because those aren't going to be respirable. It's these particles right here that make up the larger percentage of this scanning electron image right here that we are concerned about. And when these types of particles get airborne, obviously they go deep into your lungs and they're not removed by normal clearance mechanisms. That's a concern. I mentioned this earlier. The health outcome is silicosis and occupational cancer. It's irreversible, and it's progressive. Where can exposures occur? In a variety of different locations. This is a cementing crew right here. If you see the little pipe that's coming above these tanks, you can see a dust that's being created. Well, that's probably largely respirable crystalline silica. The bigger issue really is in sand moving operations. There's lots of sand that's required to frack a well. And you need to typically move this sand from a device called a sand mover, a sand master, a sand chief, whatever you want to call it, to a blender truck. That's where the sand and the water and the chemicals all go together. As these sand masters get depleted, and they will during the course of a day, they need to be refilled. This is a refill truck over here. And when you refill them, what you do is you slightly pressurize them, and you get sand dust that comes off the top. Here you can see again, there's the refill hose down below. You can see the sand dust coming out of what are called the thief hatches on top. This is a concern. Now, from a prevention through design perspective, you can see the guardrails up here. So safety's been considered because workers are going to be up there, right? Obviously. But from a health concern, there's really no protection, no inherent protection here. So that's one of the things that we're quite concerned about. Same thing here, a little closer photo. You can see quite a luxuriant plume of aerosol that's being created as you refill this sand truck. Many sand trucks being simultaneously refilled here in this photograph. So you can see a much larger plume. This is called hot loading, where actually fracking is occurring while sand loading is being loaded back onto the sandmaster. Now you can see this worker is going to go up, up on top of the sandmaster here. It's going to be well protected by guardrail systems, but does he really understand what his risk is for occupational exposure to respirable crystalline silica? So we asked that question, and we looked at it quite extensively. Another situation here, you can see that there's a plume coming out as the sand truck's being refilled. This worker probably doesn't know much about his risk to silica in this case, and this worker was not wearing a respirator. Same thing here. So basically everywhere we go, we pretty much see the same thing. So we did an awful lot of work looking at exposures to silica. And this shows you 3 sand masters. There's the dragon tail right here, 3 of them, on a transfer belt going up to the blender truck right here. And now this worker was protected. He had a full-face respirator on that day, which gives you a protection factor of 50. His exposure was 27 times the OSHA permissible exposure limit. Point of it is there's lots more sand use these days in fracking operations than there was 10 or 15 years ago. Just because of the nature of longer laterals, as some of the previous presenters discussed. You can see here, quite a bit of sand is ejected from the top of the thief hatches right here. That's a thief hatch. These are thief hatches. And it ends up either in the air, or the larger stuff just ends up on top of the sandmaster. We refer to this as the beach whenever we're up there. You can see why. Same thing here. Here's 3 sand masters, 1, 2, 3. There's the transfer belt. This is not operating on the left photo here. This is operating. You can see it's quite an aerosol problem. So these are the occupational exposure criteria, and it's appropriate for you to look at these and go, what the heck do those mean? Well, the easiest way to describe it is in terms of percentages, okay? So if the ACGHTLV, the threshold limit value, we'll just say it's 25, okay? The NIOSH recommended exposure limit is twice that, okay? It's twice that. And the OSHA, you need to do a little bit of arithmetic to calculate a PEL, but if you take and you assume that's 1, that would be 100. So 25, 50, and 100. Now, you're probably still thinking, well, this makes no sense to me at all. I don't understand this. It doesn't make any sense. So I built a little slide to help you understand what this means. So the question is, how much respirable crystalline silica is in the NIOSH REL for a full day exposure? And the easiest way to describe this is, what does it look like? Well, we weighed it out. It's 500 micrograms. The reason it's 500 micrograms is because if the OSHA, or if the NIOSH REL is 0.05, which is 50 micrograms, and a worker basically breathes 10 cubic meters of air during the course of a day, 10 times 50 is 500. It's 500 micrograms. It's not a whole lot. That's it right there, okay? That's the whole day's dose. Obviously, it's going to be hard to protect workers to this. It's essentially the same as the blood stuff. So here's some data, and there's 3 of these slides. The point really to pay attention here is that silica is an occupational exposure hazard. 21 personal breathing zone samples up in the DJ basin. 43% were greater than, these are full shift samples, by the way, for 12 hours. 43% greater than the OSHA PEL, 71% greater than the NIOSH REL. In another basin on the Fayetteville Shale, roughly half again greater than the OSHA PEL, 81% greater than the NIOSH PEL. But what you're going to see is large percentages of these. In this case, 31% was greater than 10 times the NIOSH REL. Why is 10 times important? It's important because a half-mask respirator only protects you to 10 times the PEL. And that's typically what these workers wear. Okay, so if you're wearing a half-mask respirator and you're in an exposure that's more than 10 times the PEL, the REL, whatever, workers aren't going to be protected. The same thing here. Again, I'm just showing you this as a trend. So 67% of these 27 samples were greater than the OSHA PEL. In another basin over in Colorado, at a different time of the year, 61%. 92% greater than the NIOSH REL, 94%, and it goes on. We did see one basin where, in North Dakota, in the Bakken, where there weren't any exposures that were greater than the NIOSH and than the OSHA PEL. And part of the reason for this was they used a ceramic propellant, okay, sintered bauxite, and there was less sand there. So substitution, which is a primary industrial hygiene control, definitely works. We didn't see any exposures here that were greater than 10 times the NIOSH REL. In the Eagle Ford Shale, down in Texas, not a great number of samples, but again, many of these exceeded the OSHA PEL and the NIOSH REL. So, what do you do about it? That's an important thing. Here's the overview of the 116 samples that we took. You can see large percentage of these, roughly half, greater than the OSHA PEL. Much larger percentage, 80% greater than the NIOSH REL. And upwards of 31% overall, or more than 10 times the NIOSH recommended exposure limit. So one of the things that we did is we asked ourselves, okay, where are the primary points of generation? And we asked ourselves this question because you want to look at it from a controls perspective. You know where the dust is being generated. You can look at it from an engineering controls perspective to control it. These are the 7 primary points of dust generation that we've identified to date. We took this and we said, how can we control each one of these, okay? And what we developed are 7, or actually 9, different interventions. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but, the very first one is really important. It's prevention through design. That is, when you design equipment, you design it with prevention involved. Just like the guardrails were up there to prevent people from falling, we need to think about controlling emission on the assembly itself. This is our first proposed control. It's called the NIOSH Mini Baghouse Retrofit System. And it's basically a series of baghouses that fit on these thief hatches, and they exploit the inherent pressurization whenever you refill. So you get control at the source. Another one is basically to do away with the belt underneath and put in a screw auger, so you have a dry-to-dry transfer here. You get a lot of dust that comes off the belt at the bottom. Here's our conclusions. The bottom line is, it's probably not what a lot of people are pointing their fingers at from a worker health perspective. We haven't seen, and we've done limited sampling on VOCs, but based on the sampling that we have done, we think the bigger issue really that needs to be looked at is issues relating to silica. Diesel is likely a health hazard. We haven't done as much work with that. One of the concerns that we do have is in a lot of cases when workers do wear PPE is not effective because the workers aren't clean shaven. They need to know about the hazard first of all, and that's HAZCOM. Then they need to know about the respiratory protection standard, and when you wear respirators, you need to be clean shaven. We've identified some simple controls. We've communicated these to all our industry partners, and then we've also identified some more complex controls, which are going to involve more in-depth engineering. We're working on the mini baghouse assembly literally as I speak right now. Here's my contact details. Mike Breitenstein and John Snotters down at the bottom. My contact details are also in the fact sheet, which you have a copy of in your handout. Thank you.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. We'll start with any questions from Roundtable members.
Hi, Eric. Hello? There we go. Dave Tillman, I'm a member of the Roundtable. I'm wondering also about the silica exposure at the mines, loading trucks, unloading at trains, loading trains, unloading trains, and so on along the way. Have you looked into those?
We've not. We've only looked on the E&P side, so that's extraction and production. We haven't done anything further upstream from that.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Insay Witherspoon with the Children's Environmental Health Network. While I'm, of course, concerned with all of the occupational workers, in particular, I'm very concerned about those that may be pregnant on site. So I'm just wondering, as you're thinking about the controls, how does that additional vulnerability play into the process and the thinking and the planning?
If I understood your question, did you say something about pregnant?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Yeah, even early stages. I don't. Yeah.
Right. In the more than 200 hours I've spent on site, I've only seen 2 female oil and gas workers on the E&P side. Now there may be more downstream, and I'm sure there are in refineries and all that. It's obviously something we'd be more concerned about if there were more female workers out there. I wouldn't say it's something we've looked at specifically.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Bernie Goldstein, University of Pittsburgh. 2 quick questions and then maybe a little long one. The quick question is there's a 2008 NIOSH Morbidity Mortality Weekly report showing an increase in injuries per well in the industry. Are you following that? Is that still occurring where there's more injuries per well than there have been in the past because it seemed to be more dangerous conditions? Secondly, there's at least our impression in Pennsylvania is that there's so many temporary workers coming in and out that to try to do a long-term study will be almost impossible. Is that the same thing you're finding? And thirdly, we see a very wide range in industries getting fined by the State Department of Environmental Protection for violations. There's a lot of companies that have never had a fine. There's a lot of companies that have more than twice as many violations than they have wells. We've had a lot of frustration trying to see if the worker health issues, the worker health violations, the lost time work days, tracks with the same companies, which one might expect. Is there any advice you have as to how you can put together occupational health and environmental health data?
Did you get all 3 of those questions?
I think so. Yeah, I'll try to answer those serially, Bernie. Yeah, we are looking, we've got a very active effort to look on the safety side of things. Upstream oil and gas E&P has about 7 times the fatality rate of general industry, okay? So general industry is 4 per 100,000, and oil and gas upstream is about 27, 28. Why is that? Well, motor vehicle accidents are the #1 cause of fatalities, just like in all the rest of industry as well. Second is caught-bys, or struck-bys and caught-betweens, falls from height, stuff like that. So we're definitely looking on the safety side. Commander Ryan Hill from my office has a very active effort on that. We've already published on that. That information's out there. So yeah, we're definitely, we've got the safety component and the health component. Your second question related to, right. Well, I don't know so much about temporary workers, but workers do move within the industry very quickly, and particularly for small companies. And they do this because they can go down the road to another completions company for $3 more an hour. Okay, so there's a fair amount, of mercenary work here. They're getting paid for their services, and they want to get the most money out of their work as possible. It is a concern, particularly from a follow-on perspective. How do you do surveillance on a group of workers that are that mobile and they're that transient? We understand that, we recognize it, and we haven't got our arms around it yet. Your third question related to
State.
Right.
But you were also talking
Well,
about state-by-state differences in
We have data showing a marked variation in how compliant companies are related to the Department of Environmental Protection's rules.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to see if the same companies are sloppy with the environment, are they also sloppy with worker health?
Yeah.
We just can't put that data together.
Yeah, that's right. It's because they're regulated by two different agencies. Either you're going to have your state OSHA, and then you're going to have federal EPA, or your state EPA, or your whatever DEQ, and then you're going to have your state OSHA. So, I don't think environment's really talking to labor as well as maybe there's no program that I understand to put the two together. It's probably going to have to happen on a state by state basis. But both agencies are definitely looking at it. That's for sure.
Well, tomorrow morning we have an opportunity to bring some representatives from different agencies together. We're going to remember that question. Ask it to the players tomorrow.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Marta Soledad Vela Acosta, and I was delighted to hear the data. So my question, to make it closer to the point, is to ask you. I know that scientists need to do what they do, and government agencies need to do what they do, and everybody. The key point is to connect that and get the glue. And who is the glue? This remains to be seen, apparently, because everybody seems like this is my plate. And with that aim, my question is, have you presented this information in the American Industrial Hygiene Association? And if so, when are you presenting it? And how, how can you see, to start from your view, from your point, to start, aiming to expand those professionals into eventually making the changes in policy and other fields?
That's a very good question, yeah. How are you communicating the results? In the last year, I don't even remember off the top of my head how many conferences I've spoken at. I'm not speaking at the AIH C&E this year. Okay, there's nothing on oil and gas that I'm aware of. But the AIHA, American Industrial Hygiene Association, recently began an oil and gas work group, and I am on that and actively participating. There was a very large industry conference just the week before last in Colorado, and there were 325. It's the second largest oil and gas conference in the nation. I presented there. The first largest oil and gas conference will be the OSHA Safety Conference this December in Dallas. I'll be presenting there. So we're definitely getting the word out. We've got a trade journal article which we hope to come out late summer, early fall. And we also have a peer-reviewed journal article that we hope to publish in JOEH, Journal of Occupational Health. So great question. Yeah, we plan to communicate our results and publish and continue to present. That answer your question, ma'am? Great. All right.
So we're going to take our first question from the audience.
Hi, my name is Samantha Malone. I'm a doctorate student in the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health. In Washington County, there's been a lot of controversy, obviously, and so there are security personnel who are stationed outside of these facilities. And I was wondering, one, if any of these personnel are covered by OSHA or NIOSH, investigations or air monitoring, and probably to recommend that they might be, because a lot of them are actually women. Sometimes those jobs are the ones that are the easiest for female security officers to get.
Mhm.
So I just was curious if you had done any air monitoring with them.
We haven't. Typically, we see the security folks whenever we drive into the well site on the lease road, and they're typically a fairly good distance away from the wellhead. We have not done any sampling on any security people.
Thank you.
I'm Amy Mull, the Natural Resources Defense Council. I have a couple of quick questions. First is, are your data publicly available, and if not, will you share them?
Well, we intend to share them, Amy, by publishing them.
Okay.
And we're moving towards that right now. I hope I've made some data publicly available here. I think the PowerPoint presentation is going to be available.
Okay, great.
So we intend to do that.
Super.
Absolutely.
I was wondering, the sites that you see, are there companies that invite you on site, or do you do surprise visits?
No, so NIOSH is not a regulatory agency.
Mm-hmm.
We're a research agency. We can't swoop in on parachutes and say, hey, we're here, we're from the
Okay.
government, we're here to help. Normally what we do is we drive up in really beat up rental cars with all our stuff in the back, and it's generally 4 o'clock in the morning, and they know we're coming. I can tell you though, that's a great question. Do they clean up the site? Do they do anything different? And one of the things that we ask the workers is, what's different today than the day before we came? And the workers consistently tell us nothing. And after you've been to enough frac sites, you can get an idea. I've been an industrial hygienist for more than 2 decades, and I've seen plants that have been really cleaned up before we got there. Because you always hear 2 things. You always hear 2 things generally in plants. You hear the plant manager who says, Eric, I'm really sorry the plant's just filthy today. We just couldn't have enough time to get it cleaned up. And the workers always say, oh, you should have been here yesterday. You always hear that, But you can't do that. You can't do that at a frac site. Believe me. They got to pressure up. They got to pump. They got to do everything they do. And the contractor that's doing this for the big producer, they've got a performance contract to work on. We can't see there's any way that folks can be messing with the data. We feel really transparent. We get all the MSDSs whenever we arrive on site, and we walk around to all the carboys to say, okay, there's Bactron 25. We know that's 25% glutaraldehyde. Where's the tote? Okay, here's surfactant. Where's the tote? We're looking for isopropanol. We walk around every site, and we don't really see any differences.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then my last question is just, are you interested in hearing from workers directly? Is there some kind of like a hotline, or do you recommend workers call OSHA if they have things that they want to communicate that they think are important?
Well, there's no hotline, but my phone number is in the fact sheet,
Okay.
which you have in your handout.
Okay.
It's a black phone. It's not red. I don't have 2 of them. But any workers are welcome to call me, and we have had calls.
Okay.
In fact, John Snotter has had quite a few calls from workers. So we're very interested in hearing from anybody, whether it's on the management side, whether it's on the worker side or whatever. Concerns, that they have. When you go on a site, the thing that you really need to know is, the way that I look at it is, we're 3 guys from NIOSH, and I do say guys because we haven't taken any of our female scientists out yet, just because we haven't. But the workers are the experts, and unless you know how to talk to Rolando, unless you know how to talk to Cliff, unless you know how to talk to Cody, you're not going to be able to understand what it is they do. And then the other thing is, you need to be there the entire time. Whether it's raining, whether it's 112, and we do that. We don't show up on site, put the pumps on, drive into town and have coffee. We stay out there on site. And I think we really have a pretty good, like I said, we've got 225 hours, more than 30 days on site looking at this. I think we have a pretty good idea of what's going on.
Well, thank you, and thanks for doing it.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
David?
I'm David Goldsmith from George Washington. Eric, nice presentation and good work. I have 2 related questions. One is, are there data that you at NIOSH are aware of that might demonstrate whether or not there are silica-related diseases, specifically silicosis, occurring in these workers who you just did a lot of sampling on? And the second question is, are you looking at other
types of silica-related illnesses, including
Scleroderma.
autoimmune diseases,
Right.
other kinds of chronic respiratory diseases, and also kidney diseases, all of which have been linked clearly with dose-response relationships to occupational silica exposure. So those are the sort of two questions.
Right.
I have.
Yeah, we are aware of the associated complications of silica exposure. Scleroderma, which is a dermal disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and then complications of kidney disease. We're not doing any worker biological follow-ups at this point. Again, keep in mind, this is the exposure assessment side of things. And it's fairly in its infancy. It's somewhat embryonic here. I'm the only really full-time person that's doing it. John and Mike have their percentage of an FTE, full-time equivalent. There's no systematic surveillance looking at respiratory disease in these workers right now. And I'm not aware that there's been a sentinel case of accelerated or acute silicosis in any of these workers yet. And we're asking our industry partners about this, and what they're saying is they're beefing up, and I believe them. When I say they're saying, I believe them because I see evidence of it. They're beefing up their pre-employment physicals so they get baselines on workers for pulmonary function tests. They can also clear people on the way out to see if they get any change. They're enhancing their respiratory protection program, and at least 2 of them have already started to implement controls, specifically the NIOSH mini baghouse retrofit. And I know one of them is also looking at another control as well. So very good questions. I think it's on people's radar screen.
Good.
Eric, I'm Rick Hellman. I'm a forensic pathologist and I also chair the Commission on Public Health for the Pennsylvania Medical Society. And actually, my questions dovetail with what Dr. Goldsmith was talking about. I was actually teaching on pneumoconiosis and silicosis just last week.
Right.
So my question is more from the plume that's generated and the residual material that's left on the ground. How far in radius from the site of origin is the small silica, I guess 5 microns or whatever, a danger? Obviously there's the subsequent health effects, but then there's the initial point of origin and where it presents a danger and at what point it doesn't.
Right, so Rick's question relates to fugitive dust coming off-site or off the well pad. I don't know the answer to that because, Rick, the only sampling that we've done has been personal breathing zone sampling on the workers and a few area samples right in the immediate area of the well pad. There's a fair amount of sand around the sandmasters after they get done with a stage or a day or whatever. How much goes off-site? I don't know. We haven't done fence line monitoring, and ambient air really isn't, that's not our purview, so I can't answer your question.
Okay, thank you. I think we have 1 or 2 last questions from the roundtable members.
Yeah, Henry Anderson from Wisconsin. I'm a fan